I would like to welcome you to this evening's NNU School of Business Annual Fall Enrichment Series. If you weren't here this afternoon, you missed a really insightful panel discussion. We have 5 of our prominent nonprofit organizations here talking about the challenge of managing nonprofits. It was very insightful, as I said. We will be actually posting that on YouTube if you did miss it and would like to hear about that. Tonight, or this evening, I have the privilege of introducing our keynote speaker. And before I give his impressive bio, I'd like to mention there's actually a connection here to NNU. As he's told me, this was his first faculty position was here at NNU. He taught in the speech department, so this is a little bit of a homecoming for you as well. Welcome back. So Dr. E. Arthur Self has over 30 years of experience strategically combining a leadership career in higher education with applied business theory. He held positions in a community college as well as doctoral degree granting institution and has been the president of 2 institutions of higher education, Malone University of Canton, Ohio, and Seattle Pacific University. He served as the founding dean of the School of Business at Northwest University. Dr. Self's academic preparation was in higher education, organizational communication, and speech. He received his PhD and MA at Michigan State University and his BA at Olivet Nazarene University. As a professor of business administration, he has taught and applied a variety of courses such as business policy and strategy, management, marketing, leadership, and entrepreneurship. As a business strategist, confident to senior management and investor, he has enabled the increased capacity and performance of healthy as well as underachieving companies. Additionally, Woody has served as strategic opportunity and planning analyst in scores of startup and mid-stage companies. He and his wife, Carol, reside in the Seattle area and are parents of 2 adult sons, Adam of Chicago, Illinois, and Eric of Atlanta, Georgia. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Self.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm so delighted to be here tonight. I would have to add that I do have my extra credit. Reporting form here. And if one of your colleagues does not show up, maybe I can sit in. 39 years ago, this fall, I was invited to teach at Northwest Nazarene College, and here I am 39 years later at Northwest Nazarene University. I'm delighted to be here. It's been a warm experience for me today, and I just saw Gail Ellison. Gail Ellison, I understand, is on your staff here. My wife has been trying to find this lady, contact this lady for 37 years, and we finally found her. There are others here that I've known across the years, colleagues and friends. Sam, thank you for being here tonight. Lois, thank you for being here tonight. I want you to do me a favor. Would you turn to the person next to you and look at that person and say to that person, isn't it great to have me here tonight? Everybody should feel welcome. I certainly have this day. I'm here to speak tonight about new strategies of current realities of leading nonprofit organizations. And I suppose that my remarks tonight are based upon not only the times where I've helped organizations or managed organizations that have been wildly successful, but I've also learned a great deal from organizations that I have managed, organizations that I've consulted with that have been less than perfect in their operations. And we find ourselves along that continuum from great efficiency and effectiveness to less than great efficiency and effectiveness. But I'm here tonight to talk about what I think are some of the challenges that people are going to face as they manage nonprofit organizations. I suppose you could call those lessons about managing nonprofit organizations. And I've got a couple of those. There's no really scientific research to back these first statements up, but I hope they have some relevance to you folks who aspire to manage a nonprofit organization or those of you who actually do it in your career now. These are some of the quick lessons that I've learned. Nonprofit management is like a roller coaster ride. You can enjoy it, or you can scream in terror. Secondly, you never get paid for your good days. You never get paid for your good days. Spend every dollar like it's your last dollar. Spend every dollar like it's your last dollar. I think this principle applies certainly to everyone who's in nonprofit management, but depending upon your career and how much maturity you have in the business, I'm sure this might be true as well. And the phrase is, start out as fast as you can go. If you're a senior leader, you start out as fast as you can go, and then you gradually increase your speed. You ever feel that way? I know professors do, and I'm sure students do from time to time, that you start out as fast as you can go and gradually increase your speed. Continuing, the largest bequests are always created by the longest living benefactors. And in doing so, it makes all of us at some point eager bereavers. Eager bereavers. Next, employees can't work for peanuts forever. Volunteers won't work forever without acknowledgement. Also, what we need is better recipes, not necessarily better cooking. And lastly, you never insult a donor by asking for too much. Never insult a donor by asking for too much. You will insult a donor depending upon who they are if you ask for too little. All right, so that's a little bit of the foundation. But I want to talk about the current realities. Dr. Kraft forward that. I think I did get the school colors right. Right? I had to get in the Wayback Machine to remember what those were. Let's talk about some of these constants of the boilerplate, the verities associated with nonprofit management. These are things that continuously happen, and things that we need to be aware of. Number one, and I saw this today, when there were 5 able participants in the panel. That was a good group of people. They were really good. And they knew one another. Often in those panel discussions, people don't know one another and they have their own territory. But they helped and reinforced what one another were talking about. It was a good, solid panel. And I think they hit the solid pieces. So for those students who were here, I think they really got a founding in the practicalities and the day-by-day management of what it's like to manage a nonprofit organization. Number one, let's talk about providing clarity. And each one of those folks today talked about the importance of mission clarity. Now, it's mission clarity internally, but it's also mission clarity externally. And there has to be some cohesion and balance between what you're saying on the inside and saying on the outside. And if there's incompatibility between those two messages, you've got a real problem. It makes the difficulty of the nonprofit organization or managing the nonprofit organization that much more difficult. This is a good point for business majors because in the management of nonprofit organizations, there are always 5 management functions that you have to deal with. 5 management functions and 5 management or leadership resources. And the functions are planning, organizing, staffing, directing, and controlling. So the first fundamentals of management class that you will have at this institution, I can guarantee that your professor will talk about planning, organizing, staffing, or directing. You smile at me, Dr. Kraft, like nice to have
Right from practice, right off the court.
Okay, right off the court. Thanks for being here. Planning, organizing, staffing, or directing, controlling, or some variation of that. Those are the functions of management. The resources that you manage, there are 5 of those as well. And they are called personnel, equipment, capital, information, and time. And when you manage a nonprofit organization, you never have enough of any of those, particularly time or good analytics for information. So people who manage nonprofit organizations, and this can be said of for-profit organizations as well, is that you have not only management resources, but you also have management functions, and those have to be in coordination as well. heard today with the panel was this: mission clarity and inspiring and passionate leadership, able to lead and not drive. Many years ago, I was called in to be a consultant with an organization that was frankly struggling, and they kept talking about their funding drives. We're going to have a funding drive. We're going to have a special drive. And I said, the messaging is wrong. You never drive people into philanthropy. You don't drive them anywhere. You lead them. So there's a big difference between leading and driving. And many times in the for-profit sector, you can put a little bit more heat on and drive people, or shall we say influence or motivate people. A little bit more difficult on the nonprofit side. It's always necessary to have trained and motivated staff. We heard that earlier in the day. People who really want to be there. And the term that I heard a couple times today, and it was evidenced, was the term passion. Now, I may be getting ahead of myself here, but when you look at the root word of passion, it is in the Latin passio. And passio means to suffer. So what I think I saw today were people who were willing to suffer for the mission. Now, we sometimes hear about that in business. People who are willing, an entrepreneur who is willing to suffer for the mission. We often hear about it in the military. But what you're looking for in nonprofit management is someone who is willing to suffer, passio, for the good of the recipient of the philanthropy of the nonprofit. All right, now what are you willing to suffer for tonight? I'm going to leave that hanging. Stability of staff is a good indices to say. We don't want churn in our organization, because churn in the organization, people coming in and people coming out, sends an unsettling message to the community and to the donors. And donors will pick up on this that fast. It's like Director of Development or VP for Advancement du jour. And when that happens, it signals lots of unsettled things about the internal quality of management. Let's hasten along to the next point, strength of the board. You show me your board in a nonprofit, and I'll show you your institution. Show me your board, and it shows me your institution. How possible, how passionate are those board members? Now, a few years ago, I worked with an organization that the primary motive of that organization was to be on the board. And I examined what the motive was, and the motive was not to give service, but to have your name among the board of directors. It was kind of a stamp of approval. Not in service, but as a payoff for the time and energy that these board members were putting into the mix. It's the wrong reason. The strength of the board. Now, it's tough to find, and we heard this once again today, and if the panel members are here, they talked about how essential it is to have a strong board. Now, we often hear about boards of directors that will take a for-profit corporation in a certain direction for a certain reason, for a certain strategy with a certain planned outcome. But I do think it's more complicated to create a nonprofit board than it is a for-profit board, because many times in the for-profit side, you have equity holders, you have groups representing perhaps big financial companies or insurance companies or their big blocks of shareholders who sit on the board, and they're there for primarily financial reasons to oversee the activities of the management. But the recruitment function and the orientation function and the training function for boards of directors for nonprofit organizations, I don't know if I've ever seen anybody really do this well. It's tough to find people that are willing in their careers or their stage of the career to give up their time, to give up their energy with the kind of passion that you need to move the organization forward. And what you heard today, those of you that were here, talked about how old a lot of the board directors are. Why is it? Because the older people above 50 or 60 or 70 or some cases 80 or 90, okay? They've got the time to do this. Rather than mid-career people or early career people who don't have the energy, and in some cases don't have the background, the knowledge, the body of experience that would cause them to be a really good board member. Tough to find really, really fine board members. Strength of board. another current reality, integrity of operations. And this is a lecture in itself. Integrity in purpose, integrity in finance, integrity in messaging. If that integrity for the organization is not there, financially and reputationally, and there's no inconsistency between what people are saying about themselves and what they're actually doing. Now, when I teach my management classes, I often talk about real goals and stated goals. Stated goals are the PR statements for companies, profits and nonprofits. That's what they say about themselves. That's what they want people to know. But the real goals are the ones that they put their resources into. It's where the rubber meets the road. And real goals tell the story of the real nature and the energy of the organization. Next one, funders with charitable intent. Now, we know it's difficult to find, orient, and train good board members. But when you get a board member that you've taken through that process, and they're there for other reasons other than philanthropy and good intent, and they're there to build their own reputation or enable themselves in the eyes of the internal population or the external population to be elevated, that presents a problem. Trouble with donors who have an agenda of their own and they want to be noticed. Avoid these people at all costs. And everybody said, amen, brother self. Okay. Avoid these people. Now, next, we have to have abundant and available volunteers. These are the worker bees. These are the worker bees that make your nonprofit organization go. And they ordinarily don't cost you much financially. They may cost you something emotionally, and they may cost you some time, but they had not cost you anything financially. Okay? They are abundant and they're available. Now, I want to look at this within the context of three different types of organizations. The research says that there are essentially three types of organizations. And in these three types of organizations, you have to treat the personnel differently based upon the nature of the organization itself. The first is a normative organization. The normative organization is the nonprofit, such as we're discussing, where people buy in because they believe in the mission. They believe in what's taking place. They want to help people. So you don't manage those people the same way that you manage the second type of organization. And that's based upon utilitarian methods or utilitarian motives. Now, utilitarian motives, everybody, some point in their life, probably wants to be employed. Right? Now, they particularly want to be employed. We particularly want to be employed when we get paid. And that's a trade-off. There's an old rock song that says, trading my time for the pay I get. And that's what we do. We trade our time, which is of great value, for the pay we get. Now, there has to be other things involved in the next. But utilitarian types of control and utilitarian types of organization, you motivate people differently there than you do in a normative volunteer organization. Now, the third type is a coercive organization. And a coercive organization is one where you force people to do it. Anybody here ever been in the military, the U.S. military? Raise your hand. Well, there's no army in the state of Idaho. Now, had someone raised their hand, I would have said, Madam or sir, did you ever negotiate about the time that you could get up in the morning? Oh, no. Oh, no. They told me when I had to get up. They told me when I had to shut the light off. They told me what to wear. They told me where to go. They managed my entire life based upon a coercive model. Okay, so you've got normative, utilitarian, and coercive organizations. And the problem many times with nonprofits, particularly churches, is that people in churches begin to manage people not on normative terms, but on coercive terms. I'm sorry, you can't force me to come to your church. You cannot force me to do that. So the way that you deal with people in the nonprofit is not coercive. Because if you take volunteers and you treat them with coercive means, they will walk. And all that time and energy is wasted. Okay? Now, because they're volunteers and they're not employees, you can't motivate them based upon utilitarian. They're not there for the money. So the only alternative you have is to motivate them and engage them in the organization on normative terms. They're there because they love the people that are being served. Huge difference in the way you look at nonprofits based upon those three. Let's talk about balance of programs just a moment. Now, what do I mean by balance of programs? Many nonprofits are skewed a certain way in their fundraising. And what I mean by that, there may be the annual fund, the alumni drive, so to speak, the annual fund, capital campaign, special events, plan and deferred giving. Those all create a balanced program. The problem with plan and deferred giving is that the gifts come in way, 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 way down, but the costs are now. And a lot of organizations sell themselves short on that account because they don't have the resources to sustain the plan and deferred giving until the gifts actually come in. But it's a cost incurred expense. Has to be balanced there. Has to be supported. Next, we have persuasiveness of the messaging. How persuasive is the pitch? Now, if you're going to separate somebody from their money, if you're going to engage their philanthropy, are you going to do that? I mean, the whole advertising business is about that. You realize that? You may not like McDonald's, but their message is pretty much the same. We're going to sell you a hamburger or some fries, and we're going to take your money from you. And that principle applies for profits or nonprofits. Separating people from their money is one of the foci of a nonprofit organization. Unless, it's a private foundation. Take, for example, a couple years ago, I was teaching at the University of Washington, of course, and one of the people in my group, as MBA level stuff, she was the primary architect for the new Bill and Melinda Gates organization. And we're talking about the biggest foundation in the world. They are floating in money over there. It's not only Gates money, but it's other people that Gates has talked into funding them, and then they're the liaison with the folks that have the need. It's about almost $100 billion organization. It will be bigger. But that student that I had in my class, she was the chief architect. And I looked at her, tell me, I want to know something about what takes place under the sheets, behind the closed doors, about this organization. And she kind of mocked her brow. She says, it's the most disorganized place I've ever seen. Why is that? Because you had a lot of powerful people there that had their own agendas and spending Gates' money. How are we going to spend it? Well, how are we going to spend it effectively? All right, now what's the point of this? Gates really doesn't have to have a very persuasive message. It just is. I mean, when the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, or the Murdoch Trust, or the Albertson Foundation that we've heard about today, those organizations with clout, their messaging doesn't have to be. It speaks for itself. But most of us are engaged in nonprofit organizations, or if we want to start a nonprofit organization, we got to be really concerned about messaging. That the message is tailored. And it's tailored in such a way that it elicits the kind of behavior we want from people to serve on the board, elicits the kind of behavior we want from people who are volunteer, and it elicits the right kind of money that we need to manage the organization. All right, next, productivity metrics. I believe that nonprofit organizations are the most difficult in measuring productivity metrics. All right, now, on the for-profit side, you can look at profit. Okay? But many times, clients of nonprofit organizations, their lives are enhanced. Their lives are built. People may read better. They may do math better. They may be more well-adjusted people. But guess what? That stuff is difficult to measure. When you look at a for-profit organization, look at their financial statements, Dr. Crabb, and you can tell me who's doing a good job and who's not. That's pretty simple. And there's an immediate payoff, or within that budget year, I'll pay off, hopefully. But when you look at the work of the nonprofits, the payoff and the benefit may not come for years. Perhaps long after the organization, the nonprofit is actually out of business. So this thing about productivity metrics and analytics to really take a hard look at how well the organization is doing, it's a tough thing to come by. Now, I have more to say about that when I talk about balancing budgets in just a moment. Once again, on the messaging thing, is you never get over the need to explain who you are. Years ago, I worked for a university, and I was in a coffee shop well prior to the days of Starbucks, and I engaged in conversation. And this coffee shop was like 6 blocks away from the university, a small Christian university. And I engaged this gentleman in conversation, and he said, "Well, where do you work?" I said, "Well, I'm a prof up the street here at this university." And he said, "Where's that?" I said, "It's 6 blocks up the street." And I said, "Sir, how long have you lived in this community?" He said, "I've lived here for 30 years. And I thought, man, what rock is this guy being on? And I actually apologized to this guy that particular university had never messaged and never had explained itself that the guy who lived a few blocks away knew what the university was all about. Now, who dropped the ball there? That guy was not likely to speak on behalf of the university, nor was he likely to join the board of directors or the business advisory board or to give us a penny because he didn't know anything about it. For him and for many, many, many other people, you have to continually explain who you are and what your message is and what your methods are and who it is that works for you and who's on your board. That doesn't ever change. That's always there. All right, that's the old stuff. Those are the varieties in the template. Let's take a look at some of the newer stuff. Right? Things that I think are on the horizon, strategies, and some mechanisms that can make nonprofits better. All right. First one. Decide to be mission-focused and directed, not budget dominated. You should always look at the budget through the eyes of the mission, not the mission through the eyes of the budget. The only thing a budget is a way that we're going to spend the money if we get the money, right? It's just how we're going to allocate the dollars if we get the dollars. We may not get the dollars. We may not get the budget as we would like, so we'll have to do something else. But this notion of saying balancing the budget is the primary goal of the nonprofit organization, folks, that's exactly wrong. The goal is not to balance the budget. And I've dealt with a lot of organizations that say, "Oh, if we could just get through the year, if we can just balance the budget, if we can just finish in the black and not in the red." And I say, no, that's not the point. The point is you got to meet your mission. And if your mission is good enough, you'll have to worry less about what the budget is and the revenues. Number 2. When I was a kid, my brother and I, he was 16, I was 15. And we worked for an eccentric millionaire. Now this guy was loaded, all right? Now, not all millionaires or billionaires are eccentric, but this guy was. He had a miniature animal farm. And he bought miniature animals from all over the world. And he had a beautiful, this park-like setting that he hired my brother and myself to go cut the yard and feed the animals. And he'd bring in miniature animals from all over the world. I mean, he had an air-conditioned barn. I mean, he had money to burn. And he had this phrase to get the maximum effort out of these 2 high school kids. And this is what he said. He said, "It will be fun once we get organized." Man, we worked for 2 summers trying to get organized. Man, we worked and we worked and he worked, and he was a pretty good guy because he gave us a Jeep. So here's 2 high school kids with a Jeep, okay? And he owned a big Buick dealership, so we'd go by the big Buick dealership and he'd load us up with food and he'd load us up with soft drinks. Man, we were in some kind of hog heaven most of that summer. But he would always say, "You know, it'll be fun once we get organized." Now, he was smart enough to know, and he knew that we didn't know what that meant. I can guarantee you that in the 150 1 years of this institution's existence, it's always been in the process of being organized. Can I get an amen from somebody? Now guess what? That's absolutely normal. All right? So in a nonprofit organization, if you think you got everything locked down, and man, we are organized and we got all our ducks in a row and everything is just going where it should be going, you'll always be in the process of organizing. Do you have a drawer like that at home? Some of us do. It will be fun once we get organized. All right? Let's talk about number 2 here. I'll go back and pick up that just a moment. Aim to create a budget excess which can be used to pay forward expense. About 25 years ago when I was a young president. And guess what? When I was here, I was 26 years of age. And my last name is Self, S-E-L-F. And it's Norwegian for someone who's a sea wolf. And I took the first 2 letters from sea and the last 2 letters of wolf and created Self. This is like in the 1100s. So I'm a Self. But in the college calendar that was presented, my first semester here, they put Self in there. Okay? And it showed the course when it was to meet. And I showed up. And I was sitting in the back of the room because the students thought it was going to be self-directed learning. They were and I listened. And they, about 5 minutes into it, they kind of get a little uncomfortable. Well, about 10 minutes, they started to go, what? Do we have to teach ourselves in this class? Or who is this Self guy? Because I was brand new. And then I would listen to the rumble and the tumult because they were saying, we're paid good tuition dollars for this. We better have a professor here. I'd get up and walk to the front and say, I'm Self. Now, as an evangelical, this is a problem because the Word of God is always talking about slaying self and denying self. All of us feel as though whatever our name is, we ought to have some excess. Okay? We ought to have some excess. And when things get too tight and there's no excess, there's no abundance, things begin to bog down. But I had a business manager at this college who said, I got a great idea. I said, what's your great idea? He said, our goal is not to balance the budget, but our goal is to meet the mission, and the mission is the student. So whenever we have a positive year where we have more revenue than we have expense, we're not going to tell the faculty because they're going to want raise. Okay? And we're not going to tell the students because they'll want us to reduce tuition. Because that money, if there's any money that shows up on the positive side, there will be claims upon that money that fast. So I said, okay, now we have to do this in such a way that it's legit. If we do make money, let's pay forward. Okay? Let's pay forward expenses. And what we would do is basically say, let's say if we finished the year in the black, we had $500,000. Okay, we would allocate something to everybody. Because often on campuses and other nonprofit organizations is that some people get a lot and some people don't get anything. But our strategy was to say, if we have some excess capital, we're going to kind of spread it around, and we'll give faculty a little bit more travel money, and we'll give staff a chance to buy some new equipment so their lives go better. But we'll pay it forward. And the focus changed so dramatically from an organization where we said, the purpose is not to balance the budget, but to pay forward, but you got to be cautious about what you're paying forward to, or to what you're paying forward. Okay? Now, I'm not talking about being deceitful about this. I'm just talking about the fact that many organizations basically say, we just balance the budget. We have equal amount of money coming in as what we spend, and phew, we made it through the year. I'm saying that's not good enough. Why? Because the world is too volatile financially and politically to not prepare ahead. One of the ways you do that is beyond balancing, pay forward. All right, I believe in times to come, there will be more roll-ups in nonprofit businesses. Now, I'm not saying that the 4 folks that sat here this afternoon will join together in a single organization. But on the for-profit side, we have what I call a roll-up. You know the name Wayne Huizinga. Wayne Huizinga is a multi-billionaire who lives in Florida. One time he was the owner of the Miami Dolphins football team. He is a roll-up expert. A few years ago, he recognized that there was an opportunity with a lot of independent video stores, mom and pop video stores, and he rolled all those up, went off and bought all these people, rolled them up into Hollywood video, and then sold it out before the market took a dive. He did the same thing with waste management. You know, do you have waste management here? Do they haul your trash as part of the world? He saw the same thing. Huizinga said, there's an independent trash hauling firm, another one, another one, another one, another one. Let's pull those things together in a roll-up. And we will do better in a roll-up financially than we will do, or they would do if they're financially independent or independent entity. I believe the time will come where like-minded organizations will affiliate. Now, to some degree, United Way already does this. Okay? They already do it because they're an umbrella organization for a lot of other nonprofits, and that's a roll-up that makes sense, and they've been doing it well for a long time. A few years ago, when I was the president of Seattle Pacific, Sam had just left. I was there, and we had the people who run the United Way of King County on campus. And I was there and giving them a speech about, you know, get out and raise the money and do what you can for corporate good and the good of the community, kind of a motivational speech. And I said, you know, there are certain jobs that everybody ought to have, and every student here ought to do one of these jobs, one or all of them. At some point in your life, you ought to be a waiter or a waitress. And I see you. At some point in your life, you ought to be a cab driver or a bus driver. Good experience. At some point in your life, everybody ought to be a 9th grade English teacher. Okay? Now, there's not enough money in the state of Washington to get me to go back to 9th grade English and teach Beowulf and Mrs. Haversham from Great Expectations. It ain't gonna happen. But I told that group of people that there are certain jobs you ought to have, and one of the jobs you ought to have is a volunteer for the King County United Way. And I had 400 volunteers there, and they gave me the biggest hand clap and biggest applause I've ever had for anything in my entire life. Because they wanted some help. But the United Way and others are good examples of a roll-up of nonprofits. Because the concept of a roll-up on the business side, the for-profit side, is that we can reduce cost, increase our effectiveness if we have less overhead. So if you're planning a nonprofit at some point in your life, or you're managing one, or you're an entrepreneur that makes lots of money and you want to have your own foundation, think about who else is in the same category and partner up with them. You might save yourselves some money along the way, a lot of hassle, and often you'd save yourself from a lot of hassle, but you would also find a good partner in the cause. Okay? Now, you can't do this with people who are not like-minded. It just doesn't happen. But a roll-up, I believe, over time, you'll begin to see more and more and more of that all the time, and I think it makes a great deal of sense. All right. Let's go to the next slide. I want to talk next about two phrases that I find a part of the lexicon of nonprofit these days, the people who raise money, and I think both of them are wrong. And I'll tell you why. Let me go a little bit further down. Let me get to, put the third and fourth points together and then come back to the others. I think it's good to drop the phrase give back. Okay? We hear it all the time. And the term give back, or give back of some of your resources, or what you've stolen, or what you have earned, and give it back. Okay? I don't like the term give back, because I first saw it when a few years ago, a couple of high-tech billionaires who had sudden wealth syndrome problems began to use the phrase, oh, I feel obligated to give back. I don't think you ever motivate anybody, particularly people who are entrepreneurs, who have not made a lot of money, or people who are in their 50s and 60s. If you tell them to give back, they say, wait a minute, I'm not giving back anything. Because what I got legitimately. And you make it sound, when you use the phrase give back, as though I got it in the wrong way. So if you want to ask me to give, I've got no problem with that. Okay? I see a couple of you shaking your head. Maybe you felt the same way. I don't like the phrase give back. Okay? Now, it means a great deal to me. But if you're an entrepreneur, and you've been giving to your community, and you've been giving to the church, and somebody comes along and says, Mr. So-and-so or Mrs. So-and-so, don't you think you ought to increase your give back? You're not going to get money from that person running a nonprofit. They don't like that phrase. Now, maybe younger people under different circumstances, but to my way of thinking, that's not a good term to use. The other one is sustainability. Now, you might think, okay, well, you got to hang up with that one too, eh? Well, this sustainability on the nonprofit side basically means that we're likely to go out of business. Now, there's such a thing as environmental sustainability. And basically means we cannot continue down the same path and have the same kind of ecosystem or environment we have. We have to change, and that's reasonable. But when the organization begins to say that they are wondering about their sustainability, the message is you're going to go out of business. This year, I had to consult with a university president that I think is a good university president. And he asked me to review a 10-year plan. The faculty, staff, they got together with the trustees and put a 10-year plan together. It was highly good. But they used the term sustainability. And I looked at that president and I said, sir, you've got more courage than I do. Because I would never use that term sustainability because you understand what it means and the internal constituency knows. But the external constituency, when they see that phrase sustainability, that basically messages to them that you're going to go out of business. You are not stable. Now you think, oh, well, you're over the top here. I don't think so. Because words have meaning, and that one has particular meaning for the nonprofit. Are you still with me? Let's go ahead and take a look at number one and number two. Crisis management. I am just absolutely surprised at how many organizations do not have a crisis management program. And I'm not talking about floods and fires and earthquakes. I mean, when you live in Seattle, you've got to be worried about earthquakes. And any organization that has lots of people on campus or lots of people in the building, you have to have these plans that in case these things happen. I'm not necessarily talking about that, but I'm talking about those messages that somehow get out to the community. Okay? And with social media, you have to have your own crisis management plan on the social media side. So the people in your nonprofit who run your PR, that if something negative hits the paper or begins to flourish in the social media field, you've got to counter it, and you've got to counter it that fast. Because the social media part of that crisis management is becoming more and more important all the time. A lot of organizations are not prepared to deal with it. So my suggestion is a change in the way you manage a nonprofit organization is get the counter campaign in the social media down so it can hit the market that fast. You know, certain people you ought to have good relationships with in your life. Certainly the people in your family and your employer. You ought to have a good attorney. You ought to have a good accountant. You ought to have a good undertaker. Okay? People you need at certain times in your life for special occasions. And you're prepared to do that. But nonprofits, because they get so busy doing other stuff and trying to train faculty, to train volunteers, or not faculty, but trustees, and train all these other people, they ignore. They don't realize how impacting the social media is if the message goes bad. If something on campus or something in the organization or something is not quite right. Okay? All right, everybody stand up. We've been at this a few minutes. Stand up. And pat the person that's next to you on the back. Pat him on the back. I have come to the understanding that everybody who runs a nonprofit organization from time to time needs a firm pat on the back. And everybody else does too. Okay, thank you. Rest of yourself, have a seat. Now, I don't want to get too preachy on you, because I'm not a preacher, although I look like it sometimes. And most university presidents who work for Christian colleges, they got to be a preacher sometime. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 61, there's a statement about the Messiah. And the statement about the Messiah is this: he will come to proclaim, to teach, and to heal. He'll do all these really good things. And then there's this impactful, enormously important phrase that sometimes we just kind of cruise over. Now, that was said of the Messiah. But when we look in the New Testament, Christ goes into the synagogue in his hometown. He gets the scroll and he goes back to that same passage. And he said, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to do this, to proclaim and to preach the acceptable year of the Lord and set the captives free. And then it comes down to this powerful concept: to provide beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, and a garment of praise for a spirit of heaviness. Now, folks, that is part of the mission of a nonprofit. Because there are lots of people in this world that carry ashes in their lives. And part of the role of the church and the nonprofit is to give them beauty for those ashes. And the oil of joy for mourning. And a garment of praise for a spirit of heaviness. Now, today we saw earlier websites from these 4 or 5 primary organizations. And you didn't see anybody in those websites, the images and pictures, you didn't see pictures of sad faces. You saw happy people, because those organizations were doing good in the world. They were exchanging beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, and the garment of praise for spirit of heaviness. That's the role of the nonprofit. Now, is that enough to get you turned on in your life? Oh, absolutely. I mean, you can hang your career on that. If you're looking for a mission in your life, that could be your mission statement. That could be the mission statement of a powerful nonprofit. We're about the business, regardless of the circumstance, the social, moral, physical circumstance of our client. We have spirit exchange. All right. Thank you for being so patient. Let's go on to the next slide. I believe that in time to come, that nonprofit organizations will find far more government scrutiny than they ever imagined. Right? This is not going to go away. Whether it's the state level, the municipal level, the federal level, it's not going to get any easier. And if you think, the primary reporting document for the nonprofit is the 1099, where it talks about your revenue, the 5 top earners in your organization. Now, that will get your attention. You need to get a knock on the door. Someone says, I want to look at your 1099. Well, guess what? Under charter, you're supposed to yield a 1099. How many work hours? And if it's the press, and the press is there with the TV cameras and recorders and tablets, you wonder why are these people here? What's up with that? My point is this: it's not going to get any easier. Okay? But guess what? The need gets greater. And when the need gets greater, the motive to solve the need gets greater, and the solutions ought to be greater, so you can put up with some of that junk. I understand Dr. Kraft's wife is the director of financial aid here. Do you think Christian colleges are going to have it any easier in years to come, folks? Do you think Christian churches or any faith-based organization is going to get any easier on the reporting side and government scrutiny? Buck it up. It's not going to get easier. But if your mission is strong enough, it's going to be worth it. So hold tough. Now, isn't that encouraging? I'm talking reality here, okay? I'm not sugarcoating this. This is the reality. All right? Next one, become more intentional about connecting donors and recipients. The clients, the people who receive the goodness of the donor or the mission of the organization. Frankly, I was never really good with this. I should have been better. And I'm recommending it more to nonprofit people now than ever. Is if somebody's going to give you the money, or they're going to sit on your board, and they're going to be your advocate, you need to connect them with the people who are getting the services. Now, some people have mistakenly said, oh, we can't put these people together, because then they'll know the real truth. Years ago, in a scholarship situation, we had a lady that had immense ability to give money, but she'd never been given the chance to connect with the people that she was actually scholarshiping. And I said, this is nuts. Let's get these folks together. Oh, no, we can't put them in the same room. And I said, no. Let's get them together and see what happens. Oh, man, by the end of the day, the tears were flowing. Man, she was so excited about where her money was going to help those students. And I looked at my staff and I said, why didn't we think of this sooner? Why? Because we connected the people who had the money and were giving the time with the people who needed the largesse of that activity. And their lives were changed. I'm recommending that when the government is on your back more, you've got to look to the people who are supporting you and put them together with your clients or the people you're trying to serve. Well, things change. Dramatically. It works. All right. The next one is adopt a numerical code to focus time and energy. Okay? What does this mean? There are certain, maybe, combinations of numbers that have particular significance. A graphic example is when I say 666. Okay? Well, that one kind of gets our attention, does it not? Okay? Or your social security number may get your attention. Particularly if somebody's got it and it doesn't belong to them. But the method that I had to use in my fundraising is this. It's 1,111. And it's a good way for me to focus on the things that are most important to me and to the staffs that I've managed. And I recommend a numerical code. And what I mean by this is this. I need one donor at 10 million. I need 10 donors at 1 million. I need 100 donors at 100,000 apiece. And I need 10,000 at 1,000. 1111. So in a numerical way, a way to direct thinking and direct traffic is to basically say the efforts of a nonprofit chief executive is to spend time where they need to spend time with the people that can move the meter the most. All right? Most executives have to play with the people on the top of the list. A few years ago, I heard about the Grizzlies. And the Grizzlies is a group of higher income people that from time to time are invited to go on a 2-week backpacking trip. I should say horse-mounted backpacking trip up to the mountains in Montana. The University of Montana organizes this, and it's a very selected group, but it's only for the top donors, because that president and that VP for development up there basically said we need to spend our time with our top donors. All right? So they come up with this really interesting mechanism. And they take these people on this extended, and they get away from their work, and they get away from all the cares, and guess what? Those people become even better donors. Because there's a connection that's being made, but those development people understand that we have to spend our time with the right people. So if you've got a full staff, you can give them maybe some of the 1,000 donors at $1,000 a piece. Wheaton College is very good with this. They have a group of people who commit to giving $1,000 every year, come hell or high water, whatever. It just just cranks it out. It just happens. Now, not everybody has a $10 million donor, but guess what? You got to find them. Okay? Or more. Now, a few years ago, I was looking at the paper. That's where most municipalities had papers. And I saw this story. And it was a story of this family who for years had been in the petroleum pumping business, gas and oil. And guess what? They had a big piece of property, and there was a big Texaco pipeline that went right through their property. And they went directly from the well into the pipeline. And along a 10-year contract, they had been getting ripped off because the gas company had not been reporting how much gas had actually gone in that pipeline. It was going from Texas to New York. And these folks had been ripped off to a lot of money. And I'm reading about this. I'm a business prof. I think, oh, that's kind of interesting. There was a big suit. These people got $660 million. And I'm thinking, man, I need to find out who these folks are. So Monday morning, I'm there, 9 o'clock. I'm so-and-so, and I'm here. And I had the staff get busy. Who are these people? What are their interests? Do they have children? Do they have grandchildren? 9 o'clock, I'm there. And there's this beautiful elderly woman of about 75 years of age. And she's running this business pretty much by herself. It is a good business. And I look around, and there aren't any other executives there. And I enter this conversation, and you know what I found out? Nobody in the development department knew this, but that lady's children had gone to that college. And I could smell the new carpet and the new student union. We developed a relationship, and this lady loved cats. So don't you know I did everything under the sun to get her cats. I took her to a Broadway show called Cats. I bought her little figurines that were cats. She had a granddaughter. She loved her granddaughter. Her granddaughter was in high school, but she was in South Africa. I went to the admissions people and I said, I don't care what you have to do. If you have to send somebody to Africa to find that grandchild, go do it, because grandma loves the grandchild. They got a hold of her. She was a senior, graduated from high school, and within 3 days, guess what? Guess where she was enrolled? And she went to the CATS program with grandma. That's basic development, right? I said, where does she stack up in my 111 list? Guess where she was? Way up there. So that meant I had to require myself to spend more time there. Well, long story being short, for a period of years, she kept writing a check. And I got her engaged with students and with other trustees. She came on the board of directors. She loved the place. She loved it. We added a dimension to her life that she would have not had anywhere else. We weren't taking things from her. She was giving us stuff. We didn't have to say to her, give back. She was just giving because she was a nice person. You know, I had to go beyond the ordinary measure sometimes. There was a president's home, a beautiful home. I even had the grandchild come to the house and work in the house. Now, isn't this a little strange to have the grandchild come to the house and do the, the kind of custodial stuff around the house? That was not necessary for the granddaughter, because the granddaughter had all the money she needed. It was for the benefit of the grandmother, because the grandmother had a huge work ethic, and she wasn't going to send her granddaughter to school and not have her work for it. Guess what? You concentrate on the right people at the right level, and you have staffs to help you out. Plug them into the 1111 or any other numerical system you can have, and it will work. But it is work. Okay? All right. Let's go to the next slide. Come on. A couple more. I believe in days to come, nonprofit management will need to be about the business of enhancing the financial success of donors. All right? Sam, you've been a business prof and a dean for many, many years. You tell me, if we're in private conversation, I would ask you this. Why is it that colleges and universities never consult with their business faculty about how to run the place? Ouch. They never come calling, right? We're administrators, you guys are faculty, you go over and do that. Okay? Once in a while we ought to get together in these matters. I think the role will come for the business faculty to engage with with potential donors or donors about the source of that capital. Where did that capital come from? Where did that gift come from? And if you can, in the general development activity, advancement activity of the university or whatever nonprofit, if you can get into that and say, madam, sir, you own a business, and we have got some skilled people on our board of trustees. If you've got a management or an issue, we've got some trustees who will come alongside of you because they want you engaged in our organization. Or we've got faculty. Or we've got resource persons that are dear to our nonprofit, and we want to help you because in helping you, we believe that you will help us as well. That's kind of the tit for tat, but that's a balance. And I think that kind of mentality will be a part of the mix more so than any other time. Because people are looking for solutions. People who have wealth these days want to protect that wealth, but they also want to build that wealth. And if the university or the nonprofit or whatever charity it is, a charity can help people increase that wealth, that organization will be endearing itself to that person. All right, that's great, I think, to enhance financial success of donors. All right, next one is get to the source of the gift. I mentioned that briefly. Folks, I love Idaho, okay? When I think about a nice place to live, I think about Idaho. My first son was born here. I had a terrific experience here as a rookie professor, and I get here from time to time. About a month ago, my two sons, Adam and Eric, one lives in Chicago, one lives in Atlanta. They said, Dad, you're getting up in the years. We don't know if you can do this walk again, but we like to go. There's a place up by Stanley, Idaho, up in the Sawtooth Wilderness. You go to Stanley, and there's a trail, 5-mile trail called Iron Creek Trail. Has anybody ever been there? Okay? I went that trail the first time with a group of people from College Church. It was in the Centennial, a long time ago, 1976, bicentennial. All right? I've been there 3 other times. I was 27 the first time I did that trail. I was 33 the next time. The next time was the day after my inauguration at Malone University, when I said, I need to get away for a couple of days. I'm going to go to Idaho. Let's go on Iron Creek Trail. And I did it. And now at 65, I did it a couple of weeks ago with my sons. It was a great experience. Now, the second trip I was there, you walk all the way up, you get up to the top of the mountains. Beautiful Idaho day. I mean, it was terrific. And guess what? I was sitting there kind of exhausted on a rock. And this is a long time ago. This is like 1982, 83. I'm sitting there on a rock. And here came a guy on a bicycle. And I said, look at that idiot. He's way up in the mountains. Well, what's he doing on a bike? Who would ever want a bike in the mountains? Who would ever want a bike in the mountains? Now, this wasn't a mountain bike. This was before the days of mountain bikes. This is kind of a standard 10-speed, old-style cafe handlebars. And this idiot's up in the mountains. I think it didn't compute. Now, I'm not saying had I perceived the moment, I'd have gone back and started a mountain bike company. But guess what, folks? I missed that trend altogether. The other trend that I missed in more recent days was the online dating. I had a very well-known psychologist come to me and said, what do you think? You know something about the internet. What do you think about online dating? I said, oh, you'll never go. Okay? eHarmony? What are you talking about? Okay? Match.com. Missed it. Now, guess what? I would confess that there have been times in my life when I have dealt with very wealthy potential donors. And the donors were saying to me, potential donors, I like your organization, I like you, I like your mission, I like what you folks are doing over there, and I'll help you. That's what I heard. What I should have heard, and what I missed, is that person was saying, I'm up in years, this is a very valuable company, it spins off a lot of cash, and guess what, I'll not only give you the gift, but I'll give you this business. I look back at that, and I'm embarrassed that I missed it. I not only missed it then, I missed it a couple other times. You know the name DeBartolo Jr., they're big ball creators. Eddie DeBartolo Jr. used to own the San Francisco 49ers. I was in senior Mr. DeBartolo's office in Youngstown, Ohio, and I was pitching him for the combined college fund, the independent colleges in Ohio. And I went to see him. He's a tough old bird. He looked me in the eye and said, should have been here last week. I said, sir, why last week? He said, I just gave away $33 million. And he did. He gave $33 million in cash to Notre Dame University, and Notre Dame had actually kicked him out. Now, why didn't I get there ahead of time? I knew the guy had lots of money. It was one of those experiences. Twice in my life, calling a guy that I knew a great deal about. He made a lot of money. He exited. And I went to him, and we were talking about incidentals. And he too said, you should have been here last week. Now, it wasn't $33 million. This time it was only $30 million. And that's what he gave away. What he had left over was a great deal more, and I missed it then. Because what he was saying is, I've created this money, I have this business, I've exited, but that's only one business. I got 59 other businesses here. And is there anybody on your campus that I could give those businesses to? Because my kids don't want them, my grandkids don't want them, I want to help you. And guess what I did, old Woody self? I missed it. Now, if you got a top donor, somebody that can really move the needle and move your organization ahead and make you more effective, they may say something, but they may be something more in depth, be saying something more in depth. And you ought to try to rally the resources, help them build value so they have more to give away. But you have to pay attention to what they're really saying. Does that make sense? I hope it does. I missed it. All right, we got two more. Creating for-profit means to achieve a not-for-profit end. I do believe in days to come, well-managed, nonprofit organizations will have a parallel organization. And that parallel organization will be an umbrella company for-profit businesses. Now, what's the point? Now, there's a difference between a for-profit and a nonprofit. And we heard this afternoon that nonprofits need to be managed in business with business-like principles. Okay? They're certainly not exactly the same. The missions are different. The shareholders are different. Who gets the profit? Gets the profit. It's a whole different deal. But I do think the day will come, if your money dries up on the philanthropic side and you want to meet your mission, then you have to have a parallel organization. Now, I can hear the financial managers and some of the people on the board of directors say, well, you will jeopardize our nonprofit status. And I say to them, if your organization is not sustainable, it's not going to make any difference. So I advocate this. For nonprofit organizations that have parallel organizations, I don't see any reason why this institution and or others, or ones that you're going to manage when you finish at this place, why that nonprofit had not to have a for-profit business. Okay? Now, you have to charter it different. You have to manage it differently. But guess what? The for-profit guys are in business, and they make a lot of money. You ever notice that? For-profit businesses work for for-profit businesses. They make money. Now, how is it they can make money when nonprofits can't? I'm suggesting that these parallel organizations will make a great deal of difference to the core of the mission. All right? Now, it's sometimes managed through the college's portfolio, where you have an investment manager, you take your capital or your endowment, you put it in the hands of a fund manager, and they pay, they could buy Boeing, or they could buy some bank, or they could buy the stock of Starbucks, or whatever. We want them to manage well. And that's one way to do it, but there's a limit to that. And guess what? I believe there are people on the board of directors who would rise to the bait, rise to the opportunity of saying, oh, no, that's a different way of looking at the nonprofit. You mean you want us to buy a hotel? A resort? A restaurant? We don't have the resources to manage it. I can hear that. We don't have, no, you don't have the resources now, but you may in the future, and you may have to have those at some point in the future. Is that too far off the wall? You think about for-profit organizations that are support mechanisms for nonprofits. Now you got to manage it well. You can't manage it poorly and expect it to survive. I believe that's going to happen. All right. I don't see anybody saying hallelujah with that one, but I'm going to see a few people smile at that one. Last one. You got to spend resources to eliminate the likelihood of major faux pas or social blunders. This is a true story. I wouldn't tell you an untrue story. I was invited to go to a special event that was being managed by a small college. They had been cultivating and coaxing and trying to influence a very, very wealthy family that had a matriarch. And I'm not talking a little bit of money, I'm talking a whole lot of money, in the billions. And if I mention the name, you'd know who Grandma was, the oldest person, the matriarch of the family. This institution of college had been courting this person for years. All right, so they're going to have a fall extravaganza, and it's going to be turkey and dressing, and it's going to be warm and friendly. It's the event of the year, and we're doing this, and everybody's going to put on a happy face, and the dais is full of important people, and the board chairman's up there, and the president, and the VP for student development, and the VP for business, and the VP for advancement. And man, guess where the wealthy woman is? Right there, the best seat in the house. Now, rather than spending the money on a first-class catering organization, because this is an important event, and they're trying to influence her to give $7 million for a new building, a new fine arts building, and then ramping up. This is a big deal. So I'm about 2 tables over. My wife, Caroline, we're sitting. Now they used, I'm not casting aspersions on the food service on that campus or any other campus. But there are times when you need to spend the money in an important event to hire the people who are really good at this. The wait staff, but they had some really nice students. I mean, these were good kids, wonderful students, like most of you here, or I should say all of you here, but they hadn't trained them well. All right, so I'm looking. Evening's going on. It's going swimmingly well, and I can just feel the ask. And I can see the check being written, and I can see the new fine arts building emerging out of the ground, and the president's up there with a smile on his face, and there's a drum roll. And I look over just about the time that one of the students, in an awkward moment, who had been untrained about how to serve gravy, you know, Thanksgiving turkey gravy, bless her little heart, she was trying to do the job and do it well. And she leaned kind of over the shoulder, and this mass of turkey gravy just oozed down this lady's $1,800 St. John soup. And I said, oh no, all this work, all this effort. And I looked up at the president, and he looked about that way. I mean, he bolted off that dais. He and the VP for development, they ran to the front, and man, they went a sopping the gravy. You know. And I punched my wife. And I said, man, that fine arts center just went out the window. It ain't gonna happen. And it didn't. I was there, I saw it with these eyes. And I said, I'm going to remember that, and I'm going to tell that story to somebody sometime in my life. I told you that story. And it relates to this, that if you're going to have a big, momentous event in the life of your nonprofit, do it well. Do it well. And if you're going to serve turkey gravy, do it really, really well. Thank you for being so good.
All right, we'd like to thank you so much. We'd like to take an opportunity, if you have any questions for Dr. Self, gonna open up for questions.
Yes, ma'am.
So I had a question about the whole merging, the alliances together. And
Say that again.
A question about alliances and merging of nonprofits.
Okay.
Do you see that also with for-profits and nonprofits coming together to mutual benefits? Not necessarily a nonprofit creating, but an existing for-profit.
Yeah, it happens already in many ways where a for-profit will adopt a nonprofit. That's a good place to be if your organization is the beneficiary of that activity. Part of the difficulty with that model is it's a for-profit, but is it a publicly traded or is it a private for-profit? And I think that model, where a for-profit comes alongside and assists, is more easily done in a privately held than a publicly held. Because in the publicly held, you've got much more constituencies that one has to account to. So I think that is a good emerging model. What I was trying to suggest at that point here is that I believe the day will come where there'll be, maybe mergers is a little bit strong, okay? Because that would mean a single board. Maybe more, I like your term better, the alliance. I think those alliances are more apt to happen. But I do think the day will come when even wealthy for-profits will say, we're not going to give to everybody. We're not going to give to everything. And we're going to focus. We're going to target. And it'd be nice to be that organization upon which that bullseye is placed. Okay.
I'm interested in your comment about rolling together nonprofit organizations. And I think it makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways if the missions are similar and so forth. But I did have some experience with two organizations with like missions that merged together to be more efficient. But we found the donors and the board members of each of those organizations assumed they didn't need to worry about supporting the organization anymore, either because they didn't really like the idea of merger or because they just figured the other people would do it. Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, when everybody owns it, nobody owns it.
Yeah.
Yeah, there has to be a mission match. They can't be competing organizations. They have to be so closely aligned, and then you can't have two boards. You got to have a merged board. You got to merge missions. A lot of organizations want to give up their donor list or their unique take on the world, or whatever they have that they hold very dear. So it's not only what happens; it's what doesn't happen. But it only happens in, I don't want to say ideal, but near ideal situations where you have that kind of potential. One of the fields of study that I've been really interested in is corporate mergers on the for-profit side. And they're wonderful stories. I should say dreadful stories about mergers and acquisitions. Take, for example, AOL and Time Warner. At one time, AOL was the player in online internet services. I mean, they were it. And at one time, their cap value was $220 billion. Okay, $220 billion. And then they merged. And what happened? I mean, it just went away. They lost $220 billion worth of cap value. Now, that one should have never happened. And the reason it did happen, because you had two egomaniacs as chairman and president. Okay? And after the wedding is done, somebody has to manage the integration. All right? So if you're going to join up with somebody like-minded, it's not only the marriage, or not only the wedding, it has to be the marriage, but you have to really think well ahead about the implications of that. Sometimes it just doesn't work, and it had not even tried. And there's some fairly substantial examples on the for-profit side of mergers that should not have happened, and there are fewer on the nonprofit side where mergers should not have happened. But occasionally you hear those types of things, but you got to be cautious. Yes.
I'm intrigued with your dropping of the sustainability term there, and so I just wanted to take it a step further.
Okay.
I think Gordon Gekko, has influenced us in this whole profit is evil and rotten and all of that. And so the not-for-profits have put it in the terms of the profits. So maybe we should drop that term altogether and just say mission focused versus for-profit. You still have to raise funds, be sustainable, have that sense of continuing on to provide for the mission, but it's not about making the money, it's about the mission.
Yeah, sustainable concept. If you want to keep that within the four walls of your nonprofit, and there are many, many people who are wondering about, can we keep this thing going? Do we have the resources? Are the resources available? Well, that's fine if you want to talk about sustainability within inside the family. But that's not the sort of thing you put in print for everybody else to see. Because if anything, who wants to give money to a sinking ship? Who wants to jump on a board of directors for a sinking ship? No, you're going to avoid those things. So I'm just saying, if you're going to use that, it's appropriate inside. But I don't believe it's appropriate outside. It just means really bad things. Yes?
Just in your experience, what have you found to be like the best way to incentivize the managers of nonprofits to work within the mission of the company, since their salaries aren't directly tied to the revenues of the company?
How do you incentivize the staff and the leadership of the nonprofit? Because you don't have some of the same mechanisms. Okay? But the incentive comes from the inside. It comes from an internal motive that says, this charity, this organization is about beauty for ashes, the oil of joy for mourning, and a garment of praise for spirit of heaviness. That's the driving passion. Now, where nonprofits get into problems is when their senior people make so much financially, perhaps as an incentive, that it kind of taints the mission. One of my former students, his name is Greg Bontrager. Greg Bontrager is the CEO president of the American Cancer Society. It's the largest nonprofit in the world. I saw Greg 30 years ago, and I said, this boy's got some talent. He's going to be somebody. All right? So he's the #1 guy. Now, he's a good CEO. He can be a CEO of most for-profit organizations, but his heart is in that whole not just ministry, but that whole mission statement to help people through cancer and have training programs. Now, there's not enough money in the world to incent him to do that. But if he went to the profit side, he'd be making a couple $1 million a year, and everybody would say, oh, that's pretty good. But if he made $1 million on the nonprofit side, they say, oh, he's somehow not really in tune with his mission. The problem with nonprofits is this: you get out of internal alignment. Internal alignment on compensation basically says that the top dollar, the guy, the woman, whoever's making the top dollar, okay, and the person who makes the least, the ratio is too high. Now, Jim Senegal, you know what Costco is? Costco started in Kirkland, Washington. Costco, big, our third largest retailer in the United States, with incentives. Senegal is only 10x of what the average person who works in a Costco is. He makes about $350,000 a year. Now, in that business, a multi-billion-dollar, almost $100 million business, his compensation is not that high. Now, he's got stock options and he's got equity, so we get something off the stock deal. But there's no incentive. I mean, there is some financial incentive, but it's not a great financial incentive, because he said, I have a point to prove when I start Costco, because I work for these other big box retailers, okay? And they did a lot of stuff wrong. I'm going to create Costco, and that's a mission-driven organization. It's not philanthropy, but he had a point to prove. So he's willing to take less compensation and less incentive. So you can't go back and forth. It's not the equivalent, for-profit and non-profit. But you have to be mission-directed as an incentive. Okay? I'll give you an example. My wife was a 9th grade teacher. I was a high school principal. I was the youngest principal in the state of Michigan, big high school. I got a chance to come to Northwest Nazarene College to teach. My salary that year was $7,620. And guess what? Young man, to meet people like you at this institution was all the incentive I needed. Because I was mission driven and I love the students. So it's a hard thing to assess what it's going to take to incent people to go to work or create a nonprofit organization. But it's not equivalent to the for-profit side.
Do we have any last-minute questions before we close?
I want to acknowledge someone here side of your staff. Gail, will you stand up, please? When my son was born, she's got a picture. When my son Adam was born, Gail was on this campus. She was, I think, a junior. And my wife and Gail became best of friends. And this woman, as a student, loved my son and loved my wife, and they got away. Gail came up to me tonight, basically said, "Hi, Woody. How's Carol? How are you doing? How's that?" She's got a picture of it. Show that picture. Tell the truth.
For those of you that we used to play at Kurt's Park. I'm an old woman.
There it is. That picture. Now, my wife has been looking for her since we left her in 1977. I'm delighted that Gail made herself known to me. My wife will go end over end to say, "I found Gail." Folks, that's 37 years ago. And that's one of the byproducts. Those kind of relationships, that kind of emotion, that's a byproduct of serving the right nonprofit. Now, you can serve the wrong nonprofit, and it may have an impact upon your career, but when you find the right one, long-term relationships like that, and joy happens. So Gail, I love you. Thank you for being so supportive, and I can't wait to tell you that I've seen you. Thank you very much for your attention tonight. After 37 years, I'm hoping.
Thank you, Dr. Self. If you are interested in learning more, if you've enjoyed what you've heard here tonight, Dr. Self also has a book. We promoted him as, the book was talking about good lessons from bad leaders, so he is well versed in leadership as well. I also want to take this opportunity to acknowledge and thank our Business Enrichment Series sponsors, Rathbone Warwick Investment Management and the Bank of Cascade, along with our media sponsors, Cable One Advertising. Without their support and generosity, we couldn't have these series, so we really appreciate them. We also appreciate everyone coming out tonight, and God bless, and have a great evening. And students, hand your little cards back there to Jeremy. Bye.